Today we are going to look at the worst wedding deaths ever recorded, from overloaded service lifts that became vertical coffins crushing grooms against twisted metal railings, to spooked horses whose steel-shod hooves delivered fatal blows to brides posing for selfies. It was January 23, 2016, when the mountain air hung crisp and still around the Timber Lodge nestled 6,800 feet above sea level in Colorado's Front Range. Snow dusted the pine branches surrounding the rustic venue, where Roman Clay, 41, had just exchanged vows with his bride of 12 years in a small ceremony overlooking the valley below. Roman worked in construction logistics, spending his days coordinating heavy equipment deliveries across job sites. His confidence around machinery was well earned through 2 decades in the industry. Standing 6 feet tall with calloused hands and an easy laugh, he approached most challenges with the same methodical precision he used to calculate load capacities and crane specifications. His colleagues knew him as someone who rarely backed down from a bold idea, often volunteering for the most complex equipment installations. The reception was held on the lodge's upper level, accessible by stairs or a custom-built material hoist used to move supplies between floors during prior renovations. Warning signs clearly marked the hoist as off-limits to passengers, noting it was not rated for human transport and carried a posted weight limit of 800 pounds for materials only, a rating already reduced due to the hoist's age and prior maintenance issues. The platform measured 4 feet by 6 feet, enclosed by waist-high metal railings painted industrial yellow. The shaft extended 20 feet vertically through the lodge's timber frame construction. Roman had spent weeks planning what he called his grand entrance. Rather than walking upstairs like other guests, he convinced 3 groomsmen to join him on the service lift for a dramatic arrival. The 4 men, together weighing well over the posted limit, crowded onto the platform while wedding guests gathered above and below with smartphones ready. Several family members expressed concern about the plan. The lift operator had stepped away for the ceremony. Roman pressed the up button himself, and the platform began its ascent normally. Guests cheered from the upper level as the groom waved, the men shifting their footing on the platform as it swayed under the load. The mechanical hum of the motor echoed through the shaft as the platform climbed steadily past the 10-foot mark. At approximately 14 feet, the uneven, overloaded lift suddenly failed without warning, the platform dropping vertically through the shaft. Roman, standing near the front rail, was thrown forward as the floor disappeared beneath him. His chest struck the metal guardrail with devastating force before the platform slammed into the concrete base below with a thunderous crash. The impact crushed his chest against the metal railing, causing devastating internal injuries. The sudden stop caused severe neck trauma and a catastrophic spinal injury. The sound of the crash reverberated through the lodge's wooden structure, silencing the celebration instantly. Wedding guests rushed to the lift shaft within seconds. Roman lay motionless on the twisted platform, blood pooling beneath him. The 3 groomsmen sustained various injuries but remained conscious. Emergency responders arrived approximately 18 minutes later, delayed by the lodge's remote mountain location, but Roman showed no vital signs. His bride collapsed upon seeing the scene. The county coroner ruled the death accidental, caused by blunt force thoracic trauma and cervical fracture. Both smartphone footage and the lodge's security camera captured the overload and subsequent mechanical failure. Investigators later determined the hoist's limited safety systems had been bypassed months earlier during renovations to accommodate larger deliveries. The lodge suspended operations immediately following the incident, and the reception was canceled. Roman's bride was escorted from the venue by family members and transported to a nearby hospital for evaluation. In the weeks that followed, the property's material hoist was permanently shut down. It was April 30th, 2016, at a historic estate in Lexington, Kentucky, where wedding guests gathered on a gravel drive as a white horse-drawn carriage waited for the newlyweds outside. Sarah Miller, 29, had just married her longtime partner in a ceremony surrounded by family and friends. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a local tourism company and had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding departure. Standing 5 feet 6 inches with an adventurous spirit, she was known for her love of photography and capturing special moments. Her wedding dress, a flowing ivory gown with intricate lace details, had belonged to her grandmother. The wedding reception had concluded with plans for the couple to depart in an antique carriage pulled by 2 Clydesdale horses, each weighing approximately 1,800 pounds. The animals had been decorated with white ribbons and flowers, though the unfamiliar adornments and surrounding crowd of 80 guests created visible stress. A professional handler held the lead ropes while guests positioned themselves for photos. The estate's stone mansion provided a picturesque backdrop for the departure ceremony. Sarah had stepped out of the carriage momentarily to retrieve her phone for a selfie with the decorated horses, believing the moment would be perfect for her social media documentation of the day. She positioned herself approximately 4 to 5 feet directly behind the horses, holding her smartphone to capture the scene. The handler had warned guests to maintain distance from the animals, but Sarah was caught up in the excitement of the moment, eager to document every detail of her perfect day. As guests gathered around the carriage, a small fireworks display was prematurely ignited by a guest, intended for after the couple's departure. The sudden explosions occurred 30 feet away, but the sound echoed off the estate's stone buildings. Both horses immediately showed signs of distress, with ears pinned back and heads raised high in an alert posture. The unexpected noise disrupted the carefully planned timeline. The lead horse reared up on its hind legs, pulling against the handler's grip. Sarah continued taking photos, showing no visible reaction as the situation escalated around her. The second horse began backing up nervously, its massive hooves striking the gravel as it tried to distance itself from the noise. Several guests noticed the animal's agitation, but were unable to warn Sarah in time. The right side horse suddenly kicked backward with both hind legs in a defensive reaction to the continued fireworks. The steel-shod hoof struck Sarah directly in the chest, driving her backward and off balance where her head struck the gravel driveway, causing fatal head trauma. Wedding guests screamed and scattered as the handler worked to control both agitated animals. The carriage came to an immediate halt as several guests rushed to Sarah's aid. She lay motionless on the gravel, blood pooling beneath her head. Her new husband rushed to her side while family members attempted to provide assistance. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes, but Sarah showed no signs of life. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. The remaining guests were evacuated from the area, while veterinarians sedated the horses. The celebration had transformed into tragedy within moments. The county coroner determined the cause of death as fatal head trauma caused by equine impact. Both smartphone footage and a carriage-mounted camera installed by the rental company for promotional documentation captured the sequence, clearly showing the premature fireworks that startled the animals and the defensive kick. It was October 7, 2018, near Boone, North Carolina, as strong autumn winds battered a converted barn wedding venue in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Patty Dean, 62, had recently retired after 35 years as a school administrator to focus on her family. Standing 5 feet 3 inches with silver hair and a warm smile, she was known for her meticulous attention to safety protocols and protective nature, traits that had made her both an exceptional educator and devoted mother. Today was her daughter Sarah's wedding day, the culmination of months of planning they had done together. Patty had been involved in every detail, from selecting this rustic barn venue to coordinating with vendors. She wore a navy blue mother of the bride dress and had tears of joy throughout the ceremony. The reception was held in a renovated tobacco barn featuring massive sliding metal doors that served as the main entrance. The doors measured 8 feet wide by 10 feet tall, weighing between 500 and 600 pounds each, and hung from an overhead track system. Rust had accumulated on the track mechanisms, and no secondary restraint cables had been installed. As mother of the bride, Patty positioned herself near the entrance to greet guests and manage the flow of family members, particularly young cousins running in and out of the barn. The wind had been creating problems all afternoon, causing the heavy doors to shift and sway, with no bottom guide in place to prevent lateral movement. Several guests commented on the concerning movement, but venue staff assured everyone the doors were secure. As wind gusts intensified, Patty noticed one sliding door had shifted off its track after the upper hanger rollers partially disengaged. Her maternal instincts kicked in as she moved toward the door and attempted to block its path, preventing it from swinging into the crowd of children nearby. She called for help from venue staff, but they were occupied with reception duties. A strong gust struck the barn's exterior wall, forcing the partially derailed door completely off its track. The massive metal slab tipped inward toward the reception area, with Patty directly in its path as she attempted to guide children away from the doorway. Later review of guest phone recordings and exterior security footage helped investigators reconstruct the moment the door failed. The nearly 500-pound door struck Patty across the chest, driving her backward onto the concrete floor. The weight pinned her completely, crushing her ribcage and compressing her lungs. Multiple ribs fractured inward, puncturing both lungs and causing massive internal bleeding. Wedding guests rushed to the scene, with Sarah's new husband and groomsmen attempting to lift the heavy door. The bride witnessed her mother trapped beneath the door as guests rushed to assist. 6 men managed to lever it upward just enough to pull her free, but she was unresponsive and breathing irregularly as guests attempted first aid. Emergency responders arrived 16 minutes after the 911 call. Patty went into cardiac arrest shortly after their arrival. Paramedics attempted resuscitation for 20 minutes, while Sarah held her mother's hand, but pronounced her dead at the scene. The county medical examiner determined the cause of death as fatal compressive chest trauma. The state building inspector's investigation revealed the track system had not been properly maintained and lacked required safety restraints. The venue was immediately closed. The state building inspector's findings led to the immediate closure of the venue, and the incident prompted renewed scrutiny of safety standards at converted barn wedding sites. It was September 9, 2017, at a vineyard estate in Temecula, California, where dry heat and steady winds surrounded a wedding ceremony area. Elise Ward, 29, worked as a catering coordinator for upscale events throughout Southern California. Standing 5 feet 4 inches with auburn hair, she had spent months helping plan her younger sister's wedding. Her attention to detail and calm demeanor made her the natural choice to oversee the evening's final tradition. The wedding reception was winding down as guests gathered for the sparkler send-off, a popular exit tradition where the couple walks through a tunnel of handheld fireworks. The planned route stretched 40 feet along a stone pathway bordered by decorative pampas grass and dried lavender. No fire extinguishers or water sources had been positioned nearby. Elise distributed 18-inch sparklers to approximately 60 guests, including several children between ages 6 and 10 who were supervised by adults. The wind had picked up as darkness fell, causing the lit sparklers to throw sparks in unpredictable directions. She positioned herself near the pathway's midpoint to guide guests and ensure the couple had a clear route. As the bride and groom began their walk, a 7-year-old guest lost grip of his sparkler while waving it overhead. The lit firework tumbled into a patch of dried pampas grass approximately 8 feet from the main pathway. The wind immediately caught the sparks, spreading them deeper into the landscaping where they ignited the brittle vegetation. Small flames began spreading through the grass, initially unnoticed by most guests who were focused on filming the couple's exit. Elise spotted the fire first and stepped forward to clear guests away from the growing blaze. The flames had already spread across a 6-foot section of landscaping, creating a barrier between some guests and the pathway. The fire reached the hem of Elise's floor-length chiffon dress as she attempted to guide elderly relatives to safety. The synthetic fabric ignited rapidly, melting and adhering to her legs as flames climbed upward. She stumbled and fell while trying to run, which allowed the fire to engulf her lower torso. Thick smoke from the burning fabric entered her airways, leading to rapid breathing difficulty. Elise lost consciousness quickly as severe burns and smoke inhalation overwhelmed her respiratory system. Several guests attempted to smother the flames using jackets and tablecloths, but the synthetic material had already caused catastrophic damage. Emergency responders reached the scene 14 minutes after the initial 911 call. Elise was transported to a regional burn center, where she died approximately 3 hours later. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as thermal injuries covering 38% of her body, combined with severe smoke inhalation that caused respiratory failure. Drone footage from the wedding videographer captured the entire sequence, showing how wind conditions spread the initial grass fire. The investigation revealed no direct fire code violations, as county guidelines placed responsibility for sparkler use on private event hosts. Fire officials later issued a safety advisory discouraging sparkler send-offs during dry or windy conditions, citing the incident as an example of the risk posed by open flames near ornamental landscaping. It was June 14, 2016, in Savannah's historic district, where humid evening air surrounded a renovated antebellum mansion with a second-floor balcony overlooking a cobblestone courtyard. Grant Myers, 37, worked in regional property leasing, spending his days evaluating commercial spaces and negotiating rental agreements across the Southeast. standing 5 feet 9 inches with a lean build. He was known among colleagues for his ability to evaluate property conditions and occupancy limits. His analytical mind constantly assessed structural details in every building he entered. The wedding reception was held in the mansion's main hall, with guests frequently stepping onto the exterior balcony for photos and fresh air. The wrought iron railing and wooden platform had received cosmetic updates during recent renovations, but the underlying support structure dated back decades. A small placard near the doorway indicated a maximum occupancy of 12 people, though the faded text was barely visible in the evening light. Grant had been coordinating group photos throughout the evening, encouraging guests to gather on the balcony for shots overlooking the courtyard. The wooden platform measured 8 feet by 20 feet, supported by 6 timber joists anchored to the building's brick exterior wall. Previous inspections had noted minor settling in the support beams. As the photographer prepared for the final group shot, 18 guests crowded onto the balcony simultaneously. Grant positioned himself near the center, directing others to move closer together for the frame. Several guests leaned against the railing while others shifted positions, creating constant movement across the platform. The combined weight of the guests, intensified by constant shifting and leaning, pushed the balcony far beyond its intended capacity. Security footage from the courtyard below showed the balcony beginning to sag noticeably as guests crowded toward the railing. Grant continued organizing the group as the balcony showed visible signs of strain beneath their feet. The primary support joist split at its anchor point with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtyard. Moments later, the ledger board failed at the wall connection, causing the balcony to rotate outward and peel away from the building's facade, sending the crowded group surging toward the railing. Grant, positioned in the center, fell approximately 22 feet to the stone pavement below. He struck the stone pavement head first, suffering catastrophic head and neck trauma. The impact caused severe internal injuries consistent with a high-level fall. Guests who managed to grab the railing or landed on softer ground sustained various injuries but survived. Grant lay motionless on the stone pavement, blood pooling around his head. Wedding attendees screamed and backed away from the scene as debris scattered across the courtyard. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes, but Grant showed no vital signs. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. The county medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head and torso sustained in the fall. The other 17 guests were transported to local hospitals with fractures and lacerations, but all survived. The city building inspector's report concluded that structural failure occurred due to excessive occupancy load on an aging support system. Security camera footage confirmed the sequence of events and verified the overcrowding that led to the collapse. City officials ordered the balcony closed indefinitely, and the venue suspended all events pending structural repairs and code review. It was August 18, 2017, when the evening air hung warm and still over Lake Coeur d'Alene in northern Idaho. The temperature had reached 82 degrees during the day, leaving the water invitingly calm as sunset approached across the pristine mountain lake. A wedding reception was underway at a private lakefront property, where 60 guests gathered on a wooden deck that extended directly over the water without barriers or safety railings. Zane Fisher, 4, had arrived with his extended family for his cousin's wedding celebration. Standing 3 feet 2 inches tall with blonde hair and boundless energy, he was known for his curiosity and tendency to explore new environments independently. His parents worked in different areas of healthcare and often relied on family members to help supervise him during large gatherings, assuming someone was always watching. The reception venue featured a main deck connected to a floating dock system that extended 40 feet into the lake. Minimal lighting illuminated the dock area, with only solar-powered pathway lights marking the edges. The water depth dropped to 8 feet within 10 feet of the shoreline, and the lake temperature measured 64 degrees, despite the warm air temperature. As the evening progressed, most adults became focused on wedding speeches and dinner service. Zane had been playing with other children near the seating area, but gradually wandered toward the water's edge while family members assumed he was under someone else's supervision. The dock surface remained wet from earlier boat activity, creating slippery conditions. Security cameras mounted on the property's main building captured Zane walking alone toward the dock area. He appeared curious about the boats moored nearby and moved closer to the water's edge to get a better view. No adults were visible in the camera frame. As he approached the unprotected perimeter of the floating dock, Zane slipped on the wet decking and fell directly into the lake. The sudden immersion overwhelmed him, leaving him unable to stay afloat. His small size and limited swimming ability made it impossible for him to reach the dock edge, which sat 18 inches above the water surface. Moments after falling into the lake, Zane disappeared beneath the surface. No one nearby noticed the incident as the reception continued. The wedding speeches continued for another 12 minutes before a family member noticed Zane's absence and began searching the reception area. Multiple relatives checked the main deck and surrounding grounds before someone spotted his body floating face down near the dock pilings. Two guests immediately jumped into the water and pulled Zane to the dock, where a nurse among the wedding party began CPR. Emergency responders arrived 18 minutes after the initial 911 call, but Zane showed no vital signs. Paramedics continued advanced resuscitation efforts for over 20 minutes before pronouncing him dead at the scene. The county coroner determined the cause of death as accidental drowning due to cold water immersion and aspiration. Security camera footage showed Zane walking alone toward the dock, with no adults visible nearby. The investigation revealed no safety violations, as private lakefront properties were not required to maintain barriers around water access points. However, the incident highlighted the dangers of unsupervised children near open water during social gatherings. Local safety officials later urged families hosting waterfront events to assign dedicated supervision for children, citing the risks posed by open water during large gatherings. It was June 14, 2015, at a private estate in Napa Valley, California. The grounds were prepared for an evening wedding reception, with manicured lawns converted into a formal event space. String lighting hung above banquet tables and gift displays, while a live band performed near the rear of the lawn. Near the center stood a 15-tier champagne tower on a steel platform, rising nearly 9 feet. Earlier setup revealed minor instability, but assurances were given that the structure met load standards, and it remained in place. James Paulson, 34 years old, was the groom. As part of the planned reception sequence, he had been encouraged to pour the top tier of the champagne tower himself for photographs and video. The moment was positioned as a symbolic transition from ceremony to celebration, and guests were already gathering in anticipation as the band paused and phones were raised. The estate lacked an elevated platform or built-in staging, so a 6-foot aluminum ladder was positioned beside the tower as a temporary solution. James climbed carefully, holding a single Magnum bottle as he reached the upper tiers. Guests formed a wide semicircle roughly 12 feet away, leaving a clear space beneath the structure. Footage from multiple phones shows the scene unfolding steadily, with no visible panic or disorder. As James began pouring, champagne flowed through the upper glasses as intended. Midway through the pour, he adjusted his footing on the ladder, shifting his weight slightly to maintain balance. His free hand reached out and made contact with the steel frame of the tower to steady himself. That brief lateral force transferred into the platform's rear support, which contained a latent weld defect at its joint. The compromised weld failed under the combined side load and off-center pressure. The structure lurched sharply before collapsing forward. James fell with the tower from a height of approximately 9 feet, striking the corner of a marble-topped gift table head first, as glassware shattered across the reception area. The impact was immediately followed by movement from nearby guests rushing toward the scene. Within seconds, a guest with prior medical training reached James and began assessing his condition. He was unconscious, exhibiting irregular gasping respirations and abnormal limb rigidity. Blood pooled rapidly beneath his head, spreading across the marble surface. The reception halted immediately, and guests were moved away from the scene as emergency services were contacted. Paramedics arrived about 15 minutes later. Due to the estate's remote location, James was unresponsive, with fixed, dilated pupils and no reaction to light. Airway support and intravenous access were initiated before transport. He suffered repeated cardiac arrests en route. The medical examiner later confirmed death from massive traumatic brain injury, including skull fracture and epidural hematoma. An investigation later confirmed that the platform's rear support leg failed at a defective weld joint. Review of smartphone footage allowed investigators to reconstruct the collapse sequence and confirm that lateral force applied during the ceremonial pour triggered the failure. The wedding reception was permanently canceled, and the estate was cleared that evening. The incident prompted changes in safety protocols for tiered display structures at private events, including stricter inspection requirements and restrictions on elevated ceremonial participation. It was April 8, 2016, when Piper June, a 28-year-old wedding videographer specializing in cinematic storytelling, arrived in Savannah's historic district for a destination wedding. Known for her artistic vision, Piper had built her reputation through social media marketing and word-of-mouth referrals. The bride had hired Piper for $5,800, specifically requesting footage of their departure in a horse-drawn carriage through the cobblestone streets. Piper had driven 7 hours from Charlotte, viewing this as both a professional opportunity and a chance to create portfolio pieces. Earl Simmons, a 67-year-old carriage driver with 23 years of experience, operated the white carriage pulled by Duke, a 12-year-old Percheron. During preparations, Piper noticed Duke seemed agitated, stamping his hooves and tossing his head, but Earl assured her this was normal excitement. Piper positioned herself in the front passenger seat beside Earl, her camera stabilizer mounted and recording as they departed with the bride and groom seated behind them. Her equipment captured the peaceful journey down the historic street. The footage shows their carriage traveling approximately 200 yards when a 4-year-old wedding guest broke free from his mother and ran into the street chasing a balloon, appearing suddenly from between parked cars directly in Duke's path. Earl pulled hard on the reins as Duke reared up, his front hooves lifting high off the ground in a near-vertical stance. When Duke came down, he bolted forward in panic, surging into an uncontrolled run, estimated between 12 and 15 miles per hour. Piper's camera recorded the violent bouncing over uneven cobblestones as Earl pulled repeatedly on the reins. The horse failed to respond and continued forward over the uneven cobblestones. At a nearby downtown intersection, Duke veered sharply left without slowing. The footage captures the carriage tilting onto its right wheels at a steep angle before the camera was thrown from Piper's hands as she was ejected from the elevated left side. Wedding guests reported that Piper was thrown several feet through the air, landing on her right side on the cobblestone street. Her head struck the rounded edge of a cobblestone with devastating force. A physician assistant among the wedding guests reached Piper within the first minute, finding her unconscious with rapid, shallow breathing and blood flowing from a severe head wound. The bride and groom immediately ran back to assist. Emergency services arrived within several minutes due to the downtown location. Paramedics found Piper unconscious with severe brain injury indicators. They immediately applied cervical spine precautions and established intravenous access while preparing for transport. During transport, Piper's condition worsened, with unequal pupils and rising blood pressure. Imaging revealed severe head trauma and brain swelling. Despite emergency surgery, she never regained neurological function, and recovered footage confirmed the carriage's loss of control. Investigation revealed Duke had no prior history of bolting incidents, but the sudden appearance of the child triggered an instinctive flight response. Authorities concluded the accident resulted from unpredictable animal behavior, prompting renewed safety discussions and voluntary protocol updates among local carriage operators. It was March 11, 2017, at a beachfront resort in Key West, Florida. The property had been booked for a destination wedding, with guests arriving throughout the morning as staff prepared for an afternoon ceremony. Inside the resort, activity centered around guest rooms as families dressed, coordinated schedules, and handled last-minute details before heading to the venue space. Mason Gray, 41 years old, was the father of the bride. A licensed electrician with nearly 2 decades of trade experience, he was known among family and friends for stepping in whenever something appeared unsafe or poorly installed. He was staying in the honeymoon suite reserved for his daughter and her spouse, using the room briefly to change into his tuxedo before the ceremony. While preparing, Mason noticed the bedroom ceiling fan wobbling and emitting a grinding sound. Intermittent flickering near the mounting bracket suggested a loose connection or damaged wiring. With the ceremony approaching, and no maintenance staff immediately present, Mason chose to address the issue himself rather than report it. He repositioned a wooden chair beneath the fan to gain height and reached up to inspect the mounting assembly. The circuit breaker supplying the room remained energized. A hallway security camera later showed Mason entering the suite alone shortly before the incident, after which no further movement was recorded from the room. As he examined the fan, he found the junction box cover missing, leaving internal wiring exposed. A ground wire had come loose and was no longer properly secured, creating an unsafe condition that should have been enclosed. Standing on the chair, Mason grasped the metal mounting bracket with one hand while reaching into the junction box with the other, attempting to stabilize the loose conductors. In that position, his left hand contacted an energized 120-volt conductor, while his right hand remained in contact with grounded metal. The electrical current passed across his chest, immediately causing involuntary muscle contraction. Mason was unable to release his grip. The sustained current disrupted his heart's electrical rhythm, triggering ventricular fibrillation. His body stiffened as the current continued to flow for several seconds. As his weight shifted, the chair beneath him moved, breaking electrical contact. Mason fell backward onto the tile floor below, striking the ground hard and remaining motionless. Moments later, family members entering the room found him unresponsive. Chest compressions were started while help was summoned from nearby guests and resort staff. An automated external defibrillator was retrieved and applied, delivering shocks as directed. But Mason did not regain a stable heart rhythm. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and initiated advanced cardiac life support. Medications were administered, and repeated defibrillation attempts were made. Despite prolonged resuscitation efforts, his heart never returned to a sustained, effective rhythm. Mason Gray died as a result of a fatal cardiac arrhythmia caused by low-voltage electrical injury. Examination later identified electrical burns on his hands consistent with contact points and a current path across the chest. A subsequent inspection of the room identified electrical code violations, including improper grounding and exposed conductors within the ceiling fixture. Investigators concluded that contact with an energized wire while simultaneously grounded created a lethal pathway through Mason's heart. Following the incident, the resort implemented electrical safety corrections to prevent similar hazards. It was July 22, 2017, when Maya Steele, a 26-year-old floral designer known for her artistic approach to botanical arrangements, arrived at a Santa Fe ranch venue for a wedding celebration. Her unconventional style incorporating native plants had earned her recognition across the southwestern United States and a $6,400 commission. Maya had driven her vintage 1978 Volkswagen van, converted into a mobile floral studio, to create ceremony installations across the 40-acre high desert property. The bride, a gallery owner, had hired Maya after discovering her work at an art show. After completing her installations, Maya moved her van to the vendor parking area, a gravel lot on a slight incline approximately 200 yards from the ceremony site. She noticed the catering company's large box truck parked on the same slope, with only the parking brake engaged, and no wheel chocks. A security camera mounted on a nearby utility pole later confirmed Maya had been standing at the rear of her van with the back doors open, organizing her equipment to photograph her floral work before guests arrived. At approximately 4:46 p.m., the catering truck's parking brake failed, later determined to be caused by severe cable wear and mechanical degradation. The 26-foot box truck, weighing approximately 14,000 to 16,000 pounds with catering equipment and food loaded, began rolling backward down the 6-degree slope toward the vendor parking area. The truck gained speed as it rolled approximately 80 yards down the incline, reaching an estimated speed of 10 to 12 miles per hour. Maya remained focused on her equipment with her back to the approaching vehicle, unable to hear it over ambient noise from the live mariachi band. A DJ working at the event noticed the runaway truck and shouted a warning. Maya turned toward the sound rather than away from the danger, and the truck's rear bumper struck her from behind at mid-back level, crushing her between the vehicle and her van. The impact drove Maya's van forward approximately 3 feet before both vehicles stopped, trapping Maya's body in the narrow gap. The security camera recorded the DJ and other vendors rushing to the scene, attempting unsuccessfully to push the heavy truck backward. With help, a hydraulic jack was used to lift and secure the truck, allowing Maya's extraction minutes later. She showed catastrophic pelvic and spinal injuries, profound shock, and no measurable blood pressure. Emergency services arrived 11 minutes after the initial impact due to the remote ranch location. Paramedics found Maya in profound shock from internal bleeding and immediately established IV lines, while applying a pelvic binder to stabilize fractures. Maya suffered cardiac arrest during preparation for helicopter transport, as her blood pressure collapsed from uncontrolled internal bleeding. CPR and medications briefly restored circulation, but she could not be stabilized. The medical examiner later determined she died from exsanguination caused by severe pelvic fractures and abdominal organ injuries. The recovered security footage provided crucial evidence of the brake failure and collision sequence. Investigation revealed the catering company had a pattern of deferred vehicle maintenance, leading to enhanced parking protocols requiring wheel chocks on all inclined surfaces. It was June 3, 2018, when Caleb Hart, a 38-year-old wilderness guide and outdoor education instructor, arrived at a Blue Ridge mountain overlook near Asheville to officiate his cousin's wedding. Known for his extensive knowledge of mountain weather patterns, Caleb had been conducting outdoor weddings as a side business for 3 years. Caleb had spent 15 years leading expeditions throughout the Appalachian Mountains. His cousin Nathan had specifically requested him to officiate after they bonded during a backpacking trip. The ceremony was planned for the exposed granite outcropping that offered 360-degree mountain views. The wedding photographer positioned herself approximately 50 feet from the ceremony site, using a telephoto lens to capture the intimate 34-guest celebration. Her camera was recording continuously as dark clouds began building to the west during setup. Weather forecasts had predicted thunderstorms after 6 p.m., but the ceremony was scheduled to conclude by 4:30 p.m. Caleb mentioned the approaching weather but agreed to proceed, when assured they could finish before storms arrived. The ceremony proceeded normally, with Caleb standing at the highest point of the overlook, approximately 15 feet above the seated guests. The bride and groom faced him, with the mountain vista stretching out behind them. At approximately 4:12 p.m., the first thunder echoed across the valley. The storm had moved faster than predicted, and within 90 seconds, the sky darkened dramatically, and gusty winds increased to approximately 15 to 20 miles per hour. Light rain began falling, but Caleb continued rather than evacuate. At approximately 4:14 p.m., a lightning bolt struck the granite outcropping at or immediately adjacent to where Caleb stood. The discharge lasted only milliseconds, delivering high-voltage electrical energy that traveled through his body and into the granite beneath his feet. Caleb's clothing was scorched and damaged by rapid heating, and his shoes showed signs of steam-related rupture. The strike caused sudden, violent muscle contraction, leading him to collapse backward and come to rest several feet away. He lay motionless on the granite with no visible breathing or movement. The lightning strike also created ground current that radiated outward through wet granite, delivering shocks to multiple guests within 40 feet. Several guests within roughly 40 feet were knocked to the ground by ground current. 3 lost consciousness briefly, while others experienced intense muscle contractions, temporary paralysis, ringing in the ears, and visual disturbances. The groom's father, a retired Army medic, regained enough motor control within several seconds and crawled to Caleb's position. The photographer's camera recorded him checking for vital signs and finding none, then beginning CPR while shouting for emergency services. Multiple guests attempted to call 911, but cell coverage on the remote overlook was unreliable. It took 4 minutes before someone's call connected, while the medic continued chest compressions in the pouring rain. Paramedics reached the overlook roughly half an hour after the lightning strike, and found Caleb in cardiac arrest with a systole, a non-shockable rhythm indicating no organized heart activity. Advanced life support continued for more than 20 minutes, but his pupils remained fixed with no signs of neurological response. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be cardiac arrest resulting from a direct lightning strike, with associated electrical burns and severe brain injury. The incident prompted renewed safety reviews, leading regional venues to strengthen evacuation protocols for exposed outdoor ceremonies when thunderstorms approach. It was August 18, 2018, at a garden wedding venue in Portland, Oregon. The afternoon ceremony was planned among landscaped walkways, flowering beds, and open lawn space, with guests arriving early under clear summer skies. Vendors moved between preparation areas as final details were completed ahead of the ceremony. Jade Palmer, 31 years old, was the wedding's makeup artist. She specialized in bridal beauty and had built a steady reputation over 8 years through referrals and online visibility. The bride, a fashion blogger with a modest following, hired Jade for $2,800 to provide makeup services for herself and 6 bridesmaids. Jade had spent the morning indoors completing makeup applications and preparing her emergency touch-up kit for use during the ceremony. The venue maintained beehives roughly 80 yards from the ceremony area, positioned near sections of the garden planted with flowering vegetation. Jade noticed the hives upon arrival but gave them little thought. She had no known history of severe allergic reactions and had worked numerous outdoor weddings without prior incident. As guests began settling into their seats, Jade walked through the garden toward the ceremony site, carrying her kit. A guest live-streaming the event later provided documentation of her movement through the grounds. Jade chose a path bordered by dense lavender beds, an area commonly used as a walkway and not marked as hazardous. As she crossed the path, Jade stepped onto a concealed ground-nesting yellow jacket colony hidden beneath the plants. The disturbance triggered an immediate defensive response. Within seconds, a large swarm erupted from the ground and attacked her. Jade screamed and attempted to flee. She was stung repeatedly on her legs, arms, neck, and face as she ran, managing to cover roughly 30 yards before collapsing near the edge of the lawn. Wedding guests rushed to assist her, initially observing intense pain and localized swelling consistent with multiple stings. Within approximately 90 seconds, Jade began showing signs of a severe systemic reaction, driven by the heavy venom exposure. Her voice became hoarse as she struggled to breathe. Raised red hives spread rapidly across her chest and abdomen, expanding outward as swelling progressed. Over the next few minutes, her breathing deteriorated into high-pitched wheezing and stridor, indicating worsening airway obstruction. She became dizzy and disoriented, staggered briefly, and then collapsed fully onto the grass. Her lips turned blue as oxygen deprivation intensified. An emergency room nurse attending the wedding immediately recognized anaphylaxis and directed others to call 911 and search for an epinephrine autoinjector. Jade was positioned on her back, but swelling of her tongue and throat made airway positioning ineffective. Her heart rate increased as her body attempted to compensate for falling blood pressure and worsening hypoxia. Approximately 6 minutes after the initial stings, Jade's pulse weakened and became difficult to detect. When effective circulation could no longer be confirmed, chest compressions were initiated while emergency services were en route. Paramedics arrived several minutes later and encountered severe airway swelling that made ventilation extremely difficult. Epinephrine was administered as the primary life-saving intervention while resuscitation continued. Although circulation was temporarily restored, Jade remained deeply unresponsive. She later died from catastrophic brain injury caused by prolonged oxygen deprivation following anaphylactic shock triggered by multiple yellow jacket stings. Subsequent review found the venue lacked emergency response protocols for allergic reactions despite known insect populations, leading to updated hazard communication and safety planning requirements. It was March 17, 2018. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the limestone cliffs of the Great Ocean Road near Port Campbell, where wedding guests gathered at a popular lookout point for what should have been the perfect conclusion to Ethan and Sarah Moore's destination wedding celebration. Ethan Moore, a 29-year-old civil engineer from Melbourne, had spent 3 years designing water treatment facilities across Victoria. Ethan had proposed to Sarah at this exact location 2 years earlier, making it the obvious choice for their wedding photos, despite the inherent dangers of the unfenced clifftop. The Great Ocean Road's limestone cliffs rise over 200 feet above the Southern Ocean, carved by millions of years of wave action that continues to erode the soft rock formations. The lookout points along this stretch remain largely unfenced, relying on visitor common sense and warning signs to prevent accidents. Recent March rains had saturated the clifftop soil, making the loose gravel and limestone fragments particularly unstable near the edges where foot traffic had already compromised the surface integrity. The wedding photographer, Janet Williams, had been recommended by Ethan's mother after shooting several family events over the past decade. Williams had built her reputation on dramatic clifftop shots that showcased the rugged coastline, often positioning couples dangerously close to edges for maximum visual impact. During the engagement shoot 6 months earlier, she had repeatedly pushed Ethan and Sarah to move closer to precipices, dismissing their safety concerns as unnecessary caution that would compromise the artistic vision. That afternoon, Williams had insisted on capturing one final dramatic shot of the newlyweds kissing near the cliff edge. The recent rainfall had left the limestone surface slick with moisture, and several guests had commented on the loose gravel shifting underfoot. Williams positioned the couple just 8 feet from the 220-foot drop, directing them through multiple poses while wedding guests watched nervously from a safer distance. After capturing the kiss, Williams demanded that Ethan step backward for a wider composition that would frame the couple against the ocean backdrop. She continued shooting as Ethan carefully moved toward the edge, his dress shoes struggling for purchase on the wet limestone. The gravel beneath his feet had been loosened by the morning's rain, creating an unstable surface that shifted with each step. As Ethan took his final step backward, the saturated gravel gave way completely. His right heel slipped over the edge, and his center of gravity shifted beyond the point of recovery. Sarah screamed as her new husband disappeared over the cliff face, his body striking 2 rocky ledges during the 220-foot fall. The body tumbled unpredictably, striking protruding limestone ledges, and ultimately landing on the final outcrop headfirst, causing massive cranial trauma. A guest immediately called emergency services at 4:47 p.m., but the remote location meant rescue teams required 35 minutes to reach the scene. Helicopter recovery took another hour due to dangerous wind conditions along the cliff face. The coroner determined that Ethan died instantly from massive head trauma and complete skull fracture. The force of impact had destroyed his brain tissue entirely, making survival impossible regardless of response time. Williams faced a civil lawsuit from Sarah and lost her photography business within 6 months as word of mouth spread. Sarah never returned to the Great Ocean Road and moved to Queensland to escape the constant reminders of her wedding day tragedy. It was June 14, 2015, in the Loire Valley, France. Morning mist hung low over the vineyard estate as guests gathered for a wedding rehearsal. A restored Citroën waited on a gravel drive, angled slightly uphill. The scene felt controlled, celebratory, and fragile. Nothing appeared immediately dangerous to anyone present. Lucy Bernard was 7 years old, the bride's niece and chosen flower girl. She was shy, soft-spoken, and deliberate in her movements after recently outgrowing a corrective leg brace. Walking carefully had become a habit. Family described her as observant and eager to please, practicing her role repeatedly despite fatigue. She trusted adults implicitly and waited quietly during rehearsals, clutching her basket and watching shoes pass on the uneven stone ground nearby without complaint, ever. The vehicle was a restored 1950s Citroën hired for a staged arrival. Vintage cars lack modern brakes and roll easily on inclines. Lucy understood none of this. She focused on posture and timing, standing near a low stone retaining wall while adults adjusted plans and photographers repositioned guests. The gravel surface, narrow drive, and crowd proximity increased risk if movement occurred. Children were allowed close for pictures without barriers or supervision present that morning there. During rehearsal, The Citroën stalled on the incline and refused to restart. A groomsman suggested towing it several feet using an old hemp rope found in storage. The suggestion bypassed safer alternatives, including wheel chocks or clearing the area, to avoid delaying photographs. No professional mechanic was consulted, and no one assigned crowd control. Guests, children, and staff remained clustered nearby, still watching closely. The rope was visibly frayed, stiff from age, and never rated for vehicle loads. No one voiced objection, and the decision was treated as temporary and harmless. Lucy waited beside the wall holding her basket as adults positioned the second car downhill. Photographers asked for smiles, and guests leaned forward for better angles. The incline increased backward roll potential. No safety buffer existed at all. As tension was applied, the Citroën shifted slightly. Gravel crunched under tires, and murmurs spread through the group. Lucy turned her head toward the sound, unaware the car's weight was now fully dependent on the rope alone. Children remained stationary, assuming adults controlled the situation. No one instructed Lucy to move or step away. The slope amplified any sudden failure instantly without warning or pause. The rope snapped with a sharp crack, recoiling toward the anchored point. The Citroën began rolling backward due to the incline and loose gravel, striking Lucy in the pelvis. She was critically injured immediately, sustaining severe fractures and massive internal bleeding. Witnesses heard a dull, wet impact as her body collapsed. Her basket fell, petals scattering across the gravel beneath her dress. She lost consciousness quickly, and her breathing became shallow and irregular, though complete cardiac arrest did not occur instantly. Adults rushed forward. Several people pushed the car away, relieving pressure within seconds. Despite rapid intervention, her injuries were life-threatening. Heavy bleeding and pelvic trauma made survival extremely unlikely without advanced hospital care. Panic replaced celebration as guests shouted for help. Someone dialed emergency services within moments. Paramedics arrived minutes later, assessing her injuries and stabilizing her on a stretcher before rapid transport. Lucy remained unconscious and in critical condition. Despite immediate medical attention, she succumbed to internal bleeding and blunt force trauma several minutes after the incident. Investigators later confirmed the sequence. The rope's failure, the vehicle's backward roll, and the lack of safety barriers contributed directly to the fatal outcome. The vineyard immediately banned staged vehicle entrances following the incident permanently after investigation. Lucy's parents sued the rental company unsuccessfully. Responsibility was ruled personal, not contractual. It was December 11th, 2016, in Munich, Germany. The reception hall of a suburban wedding venue was warm, despite winter outside, with heaters humming overhead. A large ice sculpture stood centered above banquet tables, dripping slowly. Marcus Keith Klein, 54, was the groom's uncle and a former machinist who spent decades maintaining factory presses and conveyor systems. Since retiring, he favored routine and stability, attending family events quietly. At the wedding, he sat near relatives, content listening rather than socializing, unaware his seat placed him directly beneath the sculpture. The centerpiece was a 10-foot block carved with floral patterns, delivered late after freezing delays. To protect it, staff brought it indoors early, suspending it from a reinforced frame. Heating vents remained active for guest comfort, accelerating melt. Drips formed puddles, noticed by servers who assumed this was normal. During speeches, condensation increased. The sculpture emitted a sharp, single crack as internal fractures propagated through the melting ice, a sound partially masked by music. Staff hesitated to interrupt, fearing disruption. No barriers cleared the area, and guests remained seated. Marcus leaned forward slightly to hear better, resting forearms on the table. The heat softened internal fractures forming from uneven melt, increasing stress at the upper joint. Minor ice shards began to loosen, threatening nearby guests, though none were struck yet. The load distribution changed rapidly. Water weakened internal bonds, and gravity pulled downward. Those nearby later recalled the loud snap just before failure. Marcus did not look up. No one instructed him to move. Cameras continued recording speeches as the structure reached its limit, unnoticed until collapse. The upper section instantaneously fractured and fell, dropping straight down. It struck Marcus's head and upper chest with crushing force, forcing his chin violently into his chest. The impact compressed his upper cervical vertebrae and completely collapsed his airway, snapping ice across the table. His body jerked forward, then went limp. Plates shattered, water and ice spraying outward. Nearby guests recoiled, screaming. Marcus made no sound, his chest never rose again. Several guests rushed to him, but the mass pinned his upper body. Someone shouted for help. Another called emergency services immediately. CCTV captured the vertical fall and the stillness afterward. Staff struggled to lift the ice, hands slipping on the pooling meltwater. Marcus's face darkened as oxygen flow ceased. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, finding no pulse and complete cervical spinal cord destruction. Resuscitation was impossible. The airway was collapsed and spinal injury complete. Broken ice fragments and pooled water documented the point of impact. Witnesses gave consistent accounts of the crack, drop, and immediate collapse. The weight and height alone explained the fatal force involved. Minor cuts and bruises were noted among nearby guests from flying ice shards, but none were life-threatening. The post-mortem report described crushed neck structures, including the windpipe and major blood vessels. The spinal cord was severed at the upper neck, instantly stopping breathing and nerve signals. Death was immediate, caused by suffocation and neurological disruption. Afterward, the venue removed the sculpture and suspended events. Large-scale ice installations were permanently banned indoors. Safety policies were revised, requiring weight verification, temperature monitoring, and exclusion zones around heavy decor. The funeral was held quietly, attended by family and co-workers from Marcus's factory. It was August 23, 2014, in Chania, Crete, Greece. The outdoor wedding reception was held on a stone terrace overlooking the sea, warm air moving steadily inland. The setting felt festive and controlled, but the environment was already unstable. Nikos Papadakis, 31, was the groom and a lifelong resident of Crete. He worked as a regional sales coordinator for an agricultural equipment supplier. He valued tradition and family reputation, and the wedding was meant to honor both. Friends described him as trusting and conflict avoidant, preferring harmony over confrontation. Nikos had no background in performance safety. He wore a tailored synthetic wool blend suit, which ignites more easily and can melt onto skin than pure wool, and stood near the center of the terrace for photographs. The space was bordered by stone walls that reflected heat and restricted airflow. The fire performers used alcohol-soaked torches rather than long-burning plant oils, which increases splash risk and rapid ignition, but none of this was communicated to Nikos. The fire dance was arranged as a surprise by friends. Performers rehearsed earlier in calmer conditions, but did not reassess the wind as evening gusts strengthened. No fire extinguishers or medical staff were positioned nearby. Nikos was encouraged to stand close to the dancers for dramatic photos, trusting their experience. As music played, guests crowded inward. The wind shifted unpredictably, pushing flames sideways. Some guests noticed sparks drifting but assumed control remained. Nikos smiled and adjusted his stance, unaware that alcohol-based fuel can splatter and ignite clothing almost instantly upon contact. Then one dancer stumbled on uneven stone. The torch struck the ground, sending burning fuel outward. A sheet of flame splashed across Nikos's chest and lapel, igniting his suit rapidly due to the synthetic blend, melting parts onto his skin while flames raced upward along exposed areas. Witnesses screamed as he flailed, hands patting uselessly at the fire. Guests rushed forward, throwing jackets and tablecloths over him. The fire dimmed but did not immediately extinguish. Nikos inhaled superheated air while screaming, collapsing to his knees. His facial hair singed immediately, and blistering developed on exposed skin across his face, neck, and hands within seconds, consistent with direct flame contact. Smoke poured from his mouth as he coughed violently. Someone called emergency services immediately. Staff dragged him away from the performance area, while others smothered remaining embers. He remained conscious but in severe respiratory distress, gasping blackened mucus streaked with blood. An ambulance arrived within 12 minutes and transported him to the nearest hospital. During transport, his breathing worsened as airway swelling developed. Medical personnel attempted intubation due to severe inhalation injury, but progressive edema narrowed the airway beyond the tube's reach. Oxygen was administered, but his lungs could no longer pass sufficient oxygen into the bloodstream. Hospital staff documented extensive burns to the torso, face, and hands, with thermal injury to the trachea and bronchi. Despite treatment, inflammation progressed overnight. The next day, respiratory failure proved irreversible, and he was declared dead. The post-mortem report detailed that death resulted from respiratory failure due to inhalation injury. Investigators cited failure to reassess wind conditions, absence of fire extinguishers, and lack of medical staff. The performers faced civil liability for negligence. The bride postponed funeral arrangements until after his death was confirmed. She withdrew from public view and canceled the remainder of the wedding events. Months later, she relocated from Crete, declining interviews and legal compensation. It was October 14, 2017, at a lakeside banquet hall in Hangzhou, China. The afternoon wedding reception moved smoothly. At the center of the room stood a tall champagne tower, meant to mark the transition into celebration. It looked stable enough, though several people noticed the table beneath it vibrated slightly when brushed. Ling Yunmin was 26, a hotel service assistant at the venue hosting the wedding. He had worked banquets since finishing vocational school, known for being careful and soft-spoken. He was the bride's cousin and had agreed to help that day to save money, hoping to leave hospitality work within a year for logistics training. Management often relied on him during high-visibility events. His job involved setup and crowd control, not performance pieces. Ling Yun understood basic service safety, but was not trained to intervene once ceremonies began. Staff were instructed to follow directions exactly and avoid disrupting the visual plan. That afternoon, the unusually tall tower of glass was assembled quickly to impress guests and social media viewers. The base table wobbled slightly during setup, but supervisors ordered staff not to adjust it once guests entered. The tower's height, combined with a slightly uneven floor, created a precarious condition. The ceremony schedule was tight, and no one wanted delays or visible corrections. As speeches ended, servers noticed champagne dripping down the lower tiers, pooling on the polished floor. Ling Yun shifted position nearby, watching for spills. He glanced at the base again, considering whether to signal someone, then stayed silent, aware of previous reprimands for interrupting ceremonies. When the bride and groom lifted the bottle, applause swelled. Champagne poured unevenly, and the tower leaned a fraction more. Ling Yun stepped back instinctively as liquid spread underfoot. His dress shoes lost traction on the slick surface. The tower tilted decisively. Ling Yun slipped backward, then pitched forward trying to recover. The structure collapsed in a cascading crash of glass. He fell face first into the debris. A long, jagged shard from one of the middle tiers struck the left side of his neck at the carotid level. Witnesses saw a sudden spray of dark red blood pulsing outward in rhythmic bursts, arcing across the white marble floor. Several guests froze, mistaking it for spilled wine. Ling Yun grasped at his throat, eyes wide, then dropped to his knees. Within seconds, his hands slipped, slick with blood. He collapsed fully, movement slowing rapidly as the bleeding continued unchecked. Someone screamed. A waiter shouted for help. A manager called emergency services immediately. Staff attempted pressure with napkins and tablecloths, but blood soaked through instantly. His skin began turning gray as circulation rapidly failed, a process completing within roughly 1 minute. An ambulance arrived 8 minutes later, but paramedics found no pulse and pronounced him dead at the scene. The post-mortem report stated a major artery in the neck had been severed by glass. Blood loss was extreme and rapid, preventing oxygen from reaching the brain. Death occurred in under 1 minute due to circulatory collapse. The venue dismantled all decorative glass structures pending review. Management received fines, but no criminal charges. Ling Yun's parents accepted compensation to clear outstanding debts. It was December 28, 2013. The humid evening air in Barangay San Miguel, Bulacan, carried the scent of food as wedding guests gathered in the concrete courtyard behind the Reyes family home. Ramon de la Cruz, a 34-year-old tricycle driver, checked his watch. The fireworks display would begin soon, marking the climax of his childhood friend Miguel's wedding celebration. Ramon had known Miguel since elementary school, driving him to construction jobs before Miguel saved enough to open his small sari-sari store. As a tricycle driver navigating Bulacan's congested streets for 12 years, Ramon supported his wife Maria and their 2 young daughters through daily 14-hour shifts. His weathered hands and sun-darkened skin told the story of countless hours exposed to exhaust fumes and tropical heat, but he maintained his cheerful disposition and was known throughout the neighborhood for his reliability and infectious laugh. The wedding celebration had been planned for months, with Miguel's family investing their savings in an elaborate fireworks display featuring a decorative chain of interconnected firecrackers stretching 100 feet across the courtyard. The display included a few large commercial-grade firecrackers firecrackers with metal casings in addition to the smaller consumer firecrackers to create louder explosions and brighter flashes. The setup required precise timing in dry conditions, as moisture could cause uneven ignition patterns that made the display unpredictable and dangerous. Earlier that afternoon, heavy monsoon rains had soaked the courtyard, leaving puddles and dampening the carefully arranged firecracker chain. Miguel's uncle, who had organized similar displays before, expressed concern about the wet conditions but felt pressure to proceed since guests had traveled from distant provinces. The family had spent a lot on the fireworks, and postponement seemed impossible. As evening approached, they decided to proceed despite the moisture, hoping the fuses would dry sufficiently. By 9:30 in the evening, over 60 guests crowded the courtyard as Miguel's cousin began lighting the chain. The ignition began normally, with bright flashes and sharp cracks echoing off the concrete walls, but the uneven moisture caused sections to fire out of sequence, creating gaps in the expected pattern. As Ramon stepped backward to avoid a particularly loud burst, he tripped over a plastic chair and fell directly onto an undetonated section containing one of the larger metal-cased firecrackers, just as it ignited. The explosion tore through his lower legs, causing deep lacerations and puncture wounds, with fragments of metal casing and fuse driven into the tissue. Some small bone fractures occurred, though no fragments reached major arteries. Witnesses watched in horror as his pants shredded, and blood immediately soaked the concrete beneath him. Ramon's screams cut through the celebration as guests rushed to help. The wounds were severe, combining burns, deep cuts, and embedded fragments from the metal-cased firecracker, consistent with injuries from improperly stored commercial-grade devices. His brother-in-law tried to call for an ambulance, but Ramon stopped him, citing the possible expensive medical bill. Ramon remained conscious, limping to the outdoor sink where he washed the wounds with tap water and carelessly poured rubbing alcohol over the lacerations, causing intense pain and further tissue damage, then wrapped everything tightly with gauze. He returned home the next day, changing bandages daily and taking over-the-counter pain medication. 9 days later, Ramon developed severe jaw stiffness, making eating impossible, followed by violent muscle spasms throughout his body and increasing difficulty breathing. Ramon died from tetanus on January 6, 2014. The bacteria had entered through the contaminated wounds, releasing toxins that paralyzed his respiratory muscles despite desperate attempts at treatment. The autopsy report confirmed that Ramon had suffered extensive soft tissue damage and multiple puncture wounds consistent with metal-cased firecracker injuries. The wounds were heavily contaminated, providing a clear entry point for Clostridium tetani bacteria. No pre-existing conditions contributed to his death. The pathologist noted generalized muscle rigidity, opisthotonos, and respiratory paralysis characteristic of fatal tetanus. Miguel and his new wife postponed their honeymoon indefinitely, overwhelmed by guilt that their celebration had cost Ramon's life. It was May 14, 2018, off the coast of Key Largo, Florida. Seas were calm, visibility was average, and the charter ran on a tight schedule. A permitted platform hovered above a shallow reef. Staff rushed briefings on depth and currents. The underwater ceremony was planned to last only minutes. Briefly, James Mercer was 34, a sales engineer for a medical device distributor, careful and risk-aware. He dove for recreation, logged about 80 dives, and preferred planning and checklists. The underwater wedding fit his partner's creativity, and discounts came through a resort marketing package. He trusted licensed operators, surface air helmets, and procedures he believed were standard and safe. The helmets were hard acrylic domes supplied by air hoses from deck compressors. Air flowed constantly, venting at the neck seal. The couple knelt on the seabed at 12 feet, waited to stay down. Safety depended on steady airflow and clear signals, not backup tanks, making calm critical if supply changed during movement, filming, noise, or cues. That afternoon's plan raised risk. A media crew asked for longer vows and more angles. A mild current increased, and surface chop tugged the hoses. The captain suggested shortening the ceremony. The coordinator overruled it to stay on schedule, citing permits and guests. No backup air bottles were placed on the seabed despite manuals, drills, past warnings, emails, and logs. As guests gathered, James practiced breathing and signaled okay. The couple descended with 2 safety divers behind them. Bubbles rose steadily, The current pulled sideways, tightening the hose against the deck hardware. A rattling sound began near the compressor, unnoticed under music. James felt airflow surge, then weaken, pressure shifting, sound dulling, breaths shortening. The compressor briefly over-released air before stalling. Witnesses later described the sound changing, followed by the hose losing tension as airflow stopped. James attempted to inhale but received no air. He raised both hands and signaled distress, gripping the rim of the helmet. As he leaned forward, the remaining air pocket collapsed and water began rising rapidly into the helmet. His breathing became fast and uneven, a pattern consistent with panic during sudden air loss. A safety diver reached him within seconds and pulled on the hose, checking for flow. The diver tapped the visor and attempted to clear the helmet while signaling the surface crew. The hose remained slack. As the diver tried to lift the helmet to re-establish airflow, James stood abruptly, likely reacting to the lack of air. His weight belt shifted out of position. He lost balance and fell forward. Water rushed fully into the helmet. His body stiffened, then stopped moving. Another diver marked an emergency on the slate and signaled upward. Emergency services were contacted immediately from the surface platform. The surface crew hauled the hose and lifted James out within a minute. CPR started immediately on the platform. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes after the call. Despite oxygen and chest compressions, breathing never returned. 3 phone videos later showed the airflow loss and rapid collapse amid bubbles, signals, current, ropes, music, and sudden silence. The medical examiner determined that James drowned after the air supply failed. Water was found throughout the lungs, with foam in the airway. No broken bones or blunt injuries were present, and the sudden loss of airflow caused acute air hunger and oxygen deprivation, explaining the visible panic and loss of control seen on video. Investigators cited extended exposure without a backup air source and scheduled pressure as contributing factors. The operator suspended underwater ceremonies during the review. James's employer quietly ended promotional ties, and the resort removed helmet weddings from its offerings before reopening the site weeks later. It was June 22, 2013, on a narrow paved road in Amish farmland, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Evening light softened the heat, traffic was sparse, and wooden fences bordered open fields. The wedding ran slightly behind schedule, and the carriage exit was expected to last only moments toward the reception barn. Sarah Whitlock was 29 and worked as a veterinary assistant at a mixed animal clinic outside Lititz. She worked with horses daily, assisting with sedation, hoof care, and transport checks. Co-workers described her as observant and methodical, someone who noticed early signs of stress before animals reacted. She rode horses recreationally and volunteered with a local rescue that retrained draft horses with anxiety issues. Her experience around animals influenced wedding decisions, including choosing a horse-drawn carriage exit she believed was manageable. The carriage company was small and local, using draft horses familiar with farm equipment, traffic, and road noise. The same team had worked rural routes for years without prior incidents. Harnesses were standard leather tack, reins intact, and the carriage wheels recently serviced. The only change from rehearsal was a last-minute suggestion by guests to use handheld fireworks during the exit. Sarah objected briefly, noting horses could react to sudden sound. The plan continued after assurances that the fireworks would be set off farther away. The carriage moved east at walking speed, Sarah seated on the rear bench with her gown gathered beside her. Guests stood along the roadside behind a rope barrier. Phones were raised. The driver guided the team forward with light rain contact. As the carriage approached a bend in the road, the first firework detonated closer than intended. The sound echoed sharply along the fence line. Both horses startled at the same moment, tightening and lunging forward before the driver could regain control. A second firework went off. The team accelerated into a gallop, hooves striking pavement unevenly. The driver leaned back, reins slipping as speed increased. Witnesses later described the carriage rocking as wheels hit patched sections of road. The carriage drifted toward the shoulder. One wheel dropped into a shallow drainage ditch, twisting the frame. The axle lifted, then slammed back down. The carriage overturned. Sarah was thrown backward, her gown catching on the exposed axle hub. The horses continued forward, dragging her along the road. The fabric tore in sections as she was pulled roughly 30 feet, her head and chest striking pavement repeatedly. Several guests ran toward her. Others remained still, recording. Emergency services were immediately called. The driver stopped the horses moments later and cut them loose from the traces. Sarah lay motionless beside the carriage, her gown torn and soaked with blood. She was not breathing. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes after the call and confirmed death at the scene due to injuries incompatible with survival. Investigation revealed that Sarah died from blunt head trauma and crushing chest injuries. Fracture patterns and road abrasions matched the measured drag distance from the carriage. The absence of defensive wounds indicated she lost consciousness early. Authorities classified the death as accidental, triggered by an animal's flight response to sudden noise. Her clinic later posted a permanent notice banning fireworks near animals. Lancaster County restricted carriage events along that stretch of road afterward. It was April 12, 2015, inside a restored 1890s stone chapel outside Napa Valley, California. The morning was calm and dry. Guests filled the pews early, drawn by age and character. Thick masonry walls and exposed timber beams suggested permanence, making structural risk feel distant and abstract to most attendees. Rachel Nguyen was 31 and worked as a structural drafting technician at a mid-sized engineering firm in Santa Rosa. Her job involved turning engineers' calculations into construction drawings, often for safety retrofits she never saw completed. She was careful, detail-focused, and often frustrated when upgrades were delayed for cost or appearance. Outside work, she tutored math at a community college and regularly finished tasks others left incomplete. Her wedding was simple, but the chapel was chosen for appearance, not safety history. Her father, Thomas Nguyen, was 58 and had run a small print shop for 30 years. He was physically capable, practical, and closely involved in Rachel's life after her mother died years earlier. He trusted old buildings that had lasted generations. The chapel had been cosmetically restored 5 years earlier, with new lighting, refinished pews, and iron chandeliers mounted to original timber trusses. No seismic reinforcement had been added. The trusses were anchored into old stone with hardware not built for sideways force. The ceremony began just after noon. The chapel was full, with guests standing along the walls. Phones were raised as the music started. Rachel entered on her father's arm, briefly aware of the chandeliers but pushing the thought aside. Napa County had experienced small tremors in the past, but there was no warning before the shaking began, and the venue had no evacuation plan. 6 seconds into the processional, a shallow earthquake struck a nearby fault. It lasted less than 10 seconds, but the first sideways jolt knocked guests off balance. Stone walls shifted, dust fell from ceiling seams, and timber trusses slid within worn anchors, producing a loud cracking sound that carried through the chapel. One chandelier hook failed under the lateral load. 400 pounds of iron and glass fell straight down. It struck Thomas across the shoulder and neck, driving him into the aisle. His neck broke instantly. Rachel was pulled down with him as the floor fractured under the impact. She hit chest first as plaster and stone fell around her. Guests screamed and rushed for the exits. Several people were knocked over. Phones recorded the collapsed fixture and debris. Emergency services were called immediately. Ushers tried to reach Rachel, but she was partly trapped under rubble. She was briefly conscious, breathing shallowly, before losing responsiveness. Paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. Thomas was declared dead at the scene. Rachel was freed and transported with severe chest injuries and internal bleeding. She suffered cardiac arrest in the ambulance and was pronounced dead shortly before arrival. The investigation concluded Thomas died from a broken neck and head trauma, injuries considered unsurvivable. Rachel's injuries included crushed ribs, internal organ damage, and severe blood loss. Structural analysis confirmed failure at unreinforced anchor points where decorative fixtures exceeded lateral load limits. The chapel was closed within days. Rachel's unfinished drafting notebooks were donated to a community college engineering program. Inspections later led to the removal of similar chandeliers from other historic buildings under the same ownership. It was October 6, 2016, in a coastal village outside San Juan, La Union, Philippines. The shoreline lay less than 100 meters away. Winds arrived in uneven bursts, stirring palm fronds and husk fibers. Offshore gust advisories were issued that morning, but no evacuation followed, and the wedding proceeded. The groom, Daniel Rios, was 32 years old and worked as a maintenance supervisor at a regional bottling plant. His job involved checking machines for wear, rust, or misalignment before breakdowns occurred. He was practical, quiet, and known for relying on written procedures. Outside of work, he helped maintain his parents' coastal house and understood how salt air weakened wood and metal over time. He was not wealthy, but financially stable, and planned the wedding carefully within a fixed budget. The ceremony structure was a temporary wedding shed built by local workers. It consisted of untreated wooden poles set into sand, woven coconut leaf roofing, and decorative fabric tied to horizontal beams. The shed was placed directly beneath a line of mature coconut trees planted years earlier to protect the shoreline. Coconut palms have shallow root systems, especially where soil erosion is present. No tree inspection was performed. Placement was based on familiarity, not risk assessment. The reception began in mid-afternoon. Wind direction shifted repeatedly, stronger than predicted but uneven. Guests noticed falling fronds and snapping fabric, but the event continued. The shed caught the wind along its sides, increasing the sideways force. The trees above absorbed repeated stress at their roots. One palm, already weakened by erosion from seasonal tides, leaned slightly toward the structure. At 4:18 p.m., a stronger gust pushed in from the water. Witnesses later described a heavy cracking sound. The palm's root base failed without warning. Instead of breaking mid-trunk, the tree rotated and fell as a whole. Gravity accelerated it downward. There was no opportunity for people beneath to move. The tree struck the shed roof first, flattening the woven panels. The trunk continued through and hit Daniel across the head and upper chest. The force drove him straight to the ground. Secondary beams collapsed, throwing nearby guests backward. The shed folded inward seconds later, trapping several people under poles and roofing. Phones recorded the aftermath. Daniel remained motionless. Blood spread beneath his head, soaking into the sand. Two nearby guests tried lifting the trunk but could not move it. Emergency services were called while efforts to pull trapped guests free from lighter debris continued. Local responders arrived 8 minutes later. Daniel was checked where he lay. He was not breathing and had no pulse. His injuries were severe and obvious. He was pronounced dead at the scene without removal. Two guests suffered broken bones and cuts but survived. The post-mortem found that Daniel died from severe head and chest injuries caused by the falling tree. Multiple skull fractures and collapsed ribs led to immediate brain injury and respiratory failure. There were no signs of defensive movement. Investigators linked the collapse to erosion at the tree base and the placement of a temporary structure beneath uninspected vegetation. The remaining palms were removed. The village council later banned event sheds under mature trees without inspection, and Daniel's employer reviewed the case during a safety briefing. It was July 21, 2016, at a rented estate outside Temecula, California. The reception spread from a stone patio onto grass beside a decorative pool. Earlier sprinklers left the ground damp. Extension cords crossed walkways for lights and music as guests moved between areas, many barefoot, while moisture lingered into the evening. The groom, Michael Turner, was 35 and worked as a facilities project manager for a regional logistics company. His job involved coordinating contractors, tracking repairs, and approving safety checks. Friends described him as practical and calm, often fixing minor issues himself. The wedding reflected that approach, with rented speakers, a freelance DJ, and temporary lighting arranged without a formal event layout. Michael was not a licensed electrician, but co-workers said he understood basic safety rules from work. The pool was decorative, shallow at the edge, with underwater lights and metal railings installed years earlier. Power for the DJ ran from an outdoor outlet to a surge strip, then across grass using standard extension cords not designed for wet locations. The main challenge that evening was layout. The dance area was placed near the pool for photos and space. A heat advisory earlier that day led many guests to remove their shoes. The DJ requested additional lighting, and moved a cord closer to the pool edge to balance sound and coverage. No ground fault protection was confirmed on the outlet. As dancing increased, drinks spilled, and condensation dripped onto the grass. Guests stepped over cords repeatedly. A groomsman mentioned moving the cable farther from the water, but the suggestion was delayed until after a song ended. The pool pump cycled, causing light vibration along the deck and nearby concrete edge. During a crowded dance sequence, a guest slipped on wet grass near the pool and fell backward. Witnesses stated she grabbed a nearby extension cord while trying to steady herself. The cable was pulled out of position and slid toward the pool, with the plug end entering the water. Within moments, people near the edge felt sharp shocks through their feet and stepped away. Michael was standing barefoot close to the pool and moved toward the fallen guest. Witnesses saw his body stiffen as he reached the wet edge. He collapsed immediately onto the concrete and did not respond. Music stopped almost immediately, as guests realized something was wrong. One person called emergency services while another used a dry wooden chair to push the live extension cord away from the pool's edge. CPR began within a minute, but Michael had no detectable pulse. Several nearby guests reported brief electrical shocks and tingling sensations before moving away from the wet area on their own. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes after the call. A defibrillator was used, and a heartbeat was briefly restored before stopping again. Michael was transported to a nearby hospital, where resuscitation efforts continued. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner concluded Michael died from cardiac arrest caused by electrical shock. Small burn marks on the foot and shoulder were consistent with the path of electrical current through the body. Wet ground lowered resistance, allowing the shock to disrupt his heart rhythm almost instantly. The investigation focused on power routing near water and the absence of ground fault protection, noting that the surge strip used for the DJ equipment offered no protection against electrical faults in wet conditions. The estate later required protected outlets for events, and the DJ updated setup procedures. The family requested privacy and did not participate in public statements. It was November 12, 2017, in a converted warehouse venue in Riverside, California. Once used for citrus packing, it held polished concrete floors and exposed steel trusses. That evening, draped fabric and fog dimmed exits. The room was crowded, the schedule tight, and the air already warm by late nightfall. The bride, Lauren Hale, was 30 years old and worked as an event marketing coordinator for a beverage distributor. Her work focused on schedules, visuals, and delivery. She was organized, familiar with vendors, and relied on approved plans. The wedding followed that approach: timed moments, lighting cues, and branded decor arranged through work contacts. Several vendors offered discounts in return for social media credit, including the draping supplier and the effects company. Lauren had no formal fire safety training beyond standard venue briefings. The hanging drapes were polyester voile, commonly used because it is lightweight and holds color. The fog machine used a glycol-based fluid that stayed low and reduced visibility near the floor. A shallow metal fire bowl using gel alcohol was approved for a short effect during the first dance. Venue staff placed it near the dance floor edge, below the fabric adjusted earlier that day. That night's main constraint was timing. The fire bowl was planned to burn for under 30 seconds as the fog thickened. The ceiling was high, but the drapes hung down to frame the floor space. One staff member noticed the fabric was closer than recommended, but allowed it to proceed to keep the schedule. No extra fire watch was assigned. Guests stood close around the dance floor, many holding phones. As the music slowed, fog concentration increased. Air movement from the ventilation system shifted without warning, pushing the haze sideways. The flame rose higher than expected as fuel fed it. Heat curled the edge of a nearby drape. There was a brief delay before anyone noticed. The fabric darkened, then ignited straight upward. Fire climbed the drape within seconds, producing thick black smoke and intense heat. The fog trapped smoke at head height, turning the room dark. Guests shouted and rushed toward exits, colliding as visibility dropped. Lauren stepped backward, caught her heel on a floor cable, and fell onto the concrete, stunned. Above her, the burning drapery failed. Melted fabric dropped in heavy sheets, wrapping her upper body and legs. The heat increased immediately. She tried to roll free but was pinned by falling material. Hot gases filled her lungs. Nearby guests heard movement but could not see through the smoke. Emergency services were called. Others tried pulling the fabric away, burning their hands. Firefighters arrived 6 minutes later to find the interior heavily involved, with flames spreading rapidly across the ceiling. Flames spread across the ceiling, igniting the remaining decor. Crews advanced hoses and contained the fire within minutes. Lauren was found unresponsive beneath melted fabric near the dance floor. She was removed after suppression and pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as burn injuries and inhalation of toxic smoke. Burns covered much of the upper body. The airway showed severe swelling and soot deep in the lungs, findings consistent with smoke inhalation while alive. Carbon monoxide levels were fatal. Death occurred before rescue could reach her. The incident was ruled an accidental indoor fire caused by an open flame placed near combustible decor. Investigators cited synthetic drapes, low visibility from fog, and delayed recognition. The venue ended all open flame effects and updated its approval process. Several vendors were removed from preferred lists after safety reviews. It was July 12, 2017, inside a modest wedding hall in Tiberias, Israel. Music drifted from rented speakers and guests moved without urgency, unaware that a small oversight on the dance floor would soon turn a tradition into a tragedy. Eitan Morel, 28, an IT technician from Haifa, was quiet and reliable, happiest behind a screen and attending events out of obligation. His fiancée, Liat, a kindergarten teacher from Safed, shared his calm nature and had spent months planning the ceremony, hoping for a joyful start to their life together. Their modest wedding reflected that careful, understated effort. In preparation for the celebration, Eitan had helped select the hall's layout and lighting, taking careful interest in practical details. The venue's polished stone flooring, chosen for durability and easy cleaning, required frequent wiping during events, particularly near the dance floor. Eitan understood these logistical concerns well. His job involved troubleshooting workplace environments where small hazards could lead to accidents. But in this case, the final checks, like verifying dry floors between transitions, belonged to the staff. By late evening, guests were ready for the hora, a traditional part of the celebration seen as essential by many family members. The plan was to lift Eitan on a chair in the center of the room. He hesitated when friends approached him, pointing out that he had never been comfortable with heights or unstable footing, but they reassured him, insisting it was part of the moment. The carriers included 2 close friends and a cousin who had been recovering from an ankle sprain, but was determined to participate. As the group formed around him, the lighting dimmed and the music grew louder. Guests began to circle, clapping and shouting encouragement. A phone video later showed the early moments. Eitan gripping the chair arms tightly, smiling nervously while the carriers adjusted their stance. Off to the side, an unnoticed patch of spilled beverage glistened under the moving lights near the injured cousin's foot. Several guests stepped around the area minutes earlier, but none alerted staff. Within seconds, the music accelerated and the carriers responded, bouncing the chair in rhythm. Eitan tensed visibly each time the chair rose. The cousin shifted his weight to keep up, placing more pressure on his recovering ankle. Just before the 37-second mark in the video, his right foot slid forward on the wet, polished floor. His knee bent sharply inward, pitching his entire side of the chair downward. Eitan's left hand slipped off the chair arm, leaving him off balance. The remaining carriers attempted to compensate, lifting their sides abruptly, which threw the chair into a sideways tilt. The angle became unrecoverable in under a second. The video shows the chair rotating, Eitan's body folding forward, and gravity pulling him headfirst toward the stone floor from roughly 5 feet. He landed primarily on the crown and upper frontal region of his skull, maximizing injury severity. The impact was immediate and severe. Witnesses later described hearing a single hard crack that cut through the music. Eitan collapsed onto his side, motionless, with no visible reflex to break the fall. A pool of blood spread quickly outward from the crown of his head. A guest immediately called emergency medical service, reporting the fall and critical injury. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, stabilized him with a cervical collar, placed him on a stretcher, and began transport to the hospital. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Footage, medical imagery, and witness accounts formed the basis of the incident reconstruction. The coroner documented a fatal atlanto-occipital dislocation, a comminuted skull fracture, and catastrophic brainstem disruption. The report noted that the injuries were unsurvivable and instantaneous. In the days that followed, the wedding hall conducted an internal review of its floor maintenance procedures during events. Aitan's workplace later created a quiet, yearly tradition. A small horror playlist played during their office gathering, accompanied by a brief reminder on event safety. It was March 2, 2013, in Shijiazhuang, China. A banquet hall was already warm from the crowd gathering inside. Among the preparations for the upcoming wedding, a potentially hazardous setup involving indoor pyrotechnics went unnoticed by guests and staff. Junwei Han, 29, worked as a warehouse logistics coordinator. His supervisors described him as steady under pressure, and small vendors occasionally asked for him by name when loading schedules tightened. Recently, he had agreed to help with an upcoming wedding, specifically because the groom was a close friend from secondary school. The hall's setup involved certified indoor cold spark pyrotechnic units, designed to produce brief columns of sparks without open flame if used correctly. They were commonly used in indoor venues, but safe operation depended on a minimum vertical clearance of roughly 5 feet from any combustible surface and careful alignment of the jets. The decorative drapes, made from synthetic fabric, had been lowered for aesthetic symmetry, leaving the vertical distance dangerously small, less than 3 feet. Junwei noticed the narrow gap earlier but assumed the technician had already checked the tolerances. The assignment that day was straightforward. Stand beside the groom at the edge of the platform and hold the ring box until the exchange. What made the setup riskier than normal was the venue's decision to keep all 4 pyrotechnic units active, despite the low ceiling and tightly hanging drapes. A technician conducted a quick test shortly before the ceremony, during which one jet flared a few inches off angle. He considered it a routine hiccup and reset the unit, without verifying the actual gap to overhead fabric. Staff were rushed, guests were already seated, and no formal safety review had been conducted. In the minutes leading up to the incident, Junwei shifted his stance to create a clearer path for older relatives he expected might need space when leaving later. The groom and bride prepared for their entrance, and technicians focused on timing rather than environmental risks. Camera operators positioned themselves near the side aisles, capturing clear footage of the platform and ceiling decor. Nothing in the room sounded abnormal, but witnesses later said the air had a faint chemical dryness just before activation, likely caused by static buildup in the synthetic drapes. When the pyrotechnics triggered, 3 jets fired as planned. However, the 4th shot angled slightly upward, striking the overhanging drapes. The synthetic fibers ignited almost instantly, and multiple sparks hit concentrated areas, producing a small, rapidly spreading flame. Guests froze. Some bolted, others hesitated, uncertain if it was part of the show. Junwei stepped forward, ushering elderly attendees toward an exit. But within seconds, the flames licked the rafters, heating the exposed timber support beam above the platform. Heat distortion intensified, and the weakened beam, already compromised by age and moisture exposure, split with a sharp crack. Investigators later noted that the flame had burned for approximately 5 to 7 seconds before structural failure, which was enough to compromise the integrity of the wooden beam. It slammed diagonally onto Junwei, striking his shoulders and upper back, and forcing him face first onto the stage. Burning embers and fragments of fabric rained around him. Guests' attempts to reach him were blocked by falling debris and rising heat, and the nearest onlookers retreated as another section of ceiling began to sag. A nearby usher immediately called the Shijiazhuang Fire Department and local EMS, reporting the collapse and trapped victim. Firefighters and paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly extinguishing the flames and carefully removing debris. When they reached Junwei, he was unconscious, face pressed against the scorched stage floor, arms pinned beneath the splintered timber. He was removed safely from the debris, but despite immediate resuscitation attempts at a cleared area, He was pronounced dead at the scene. Paramedics confirmed that the combination of crush asphyxia and inhalation of smoke and superheated air made survival impossible. The coroner determined the cause of death as traumatic asphyxia from beam compression compounded by thermal inhalation injury. The Municipal Safety Bureau cited improper drapery clearance, unverified pyrotechnic angles, and a compromised support beam. The venue was fined, required to remove all overhead synthetic fabrics, replace weakened structures, and enforce mandatory indoor pyrotechnic safety checks. It was August 16, 2014, in a rented events hall in Catanduanes, Philippines. Evening humidity settled into the open windows, carrying the familiar buzz of nearby power lines and the uneven rumble of a portable generator outside. Roland Abello, 34, worked as a call center supervisor known for organizing small in-office programs and volunteering for community events. He enjoyed singing and took pride in planning details, especially for his upcoming wedding with his soon-to-be bride, Christy. Friends described him as someone who avoided unnecessary spending but insisted on making gatherings feel personal. Because of the recurring brownouts in the region, Roland had researched budget-friendly equipment options. The mobile DJ he hired used a portable 220 volts, 60 Hz generator, adequate for powering speakers and lights but sensitive to load fluctuations. At the venue, power was run through long extension cords fed through a window and taped to the floor. Most of the equipment relied on proper grounding to prevent stray current from moving through metal components, especially microphone stands. The DJ stand, however, had a severed grounding wire that had been wrapped in electrical tape rather than replaced. Under normal voltage, it might have remained unnoticed, but the generator's inconsistent output increased the chance of a fault. The couple planned a short program where Roland would perform a duet with his bride. It was an optional part of the evening, added mostly because relatives insisted on capturing a recording to share with extended family. Earlier that afternoon, the generator had stalled twice during sound checks, but the DJ assured everyone it was normal and insisted the equipment would stabilize once the program began. A brief warning about possible surges was mentioned, but no one stepped back to reassess the wiring or the condition of the stand. Minutes before the performance, guests crowded near the front with their phones raised. The room's lights dimmed slightly as the generator took on the load of additional speakers. Roland approached the microphone stand while adjusting his shirt sleeves, focused on timing his entrance. The instant Roland wrapped his right hand around the metal stand, a sharp electrical snap was heard. His body stiffened in a rigid, locked posture. The electrical path ran from his right hand through his body to his feet, which were in contact with the stage floor, completing the circuit. Video taken by guests shows him unable to release his grip, his left arm drawing tightly to his chest as his jaw clenched. The generator's uneven output continued feeding current through the ungrounded stand, holding him in place for several seconds. When the generator sputtered and cut out, Roland's body released abruptly. He fell backward from the approximately 10-inch stage edge without protective movement. His head struck the concrete stage edge, producing a secondary impact. A nearby stagehand immediately called local emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. Despite resuscitation efforts, Roland was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy determined the primary cause of death to be ventricular fibrillation from electrocution. Secondary injuries included a depressed occipital skull fracture, consistent with the backward fall after cardiac arrest. In the days following, his bride declined criminal charges. The couple's extended families worked quietly to support Christy, helping her navigate grief while preserving the personal touches Roland had always valued for gatherings and celebrations. It was November 1st, 2014, in Jaipur, India, where late afternoon warmth held over the narrow lanes leading to a wedding venue. The decorated baggie at the front looked steady enough, but the small signs of strain around the horse and handler hinted at risks no one chose to acknowledge. Anaya Joshi, 25, worked as a kindergarten teacher, known for organizing cultural days and encouraging her students to learn traditional songs. She had always imagined arriving at her wedding in a classic horse-drawn carriage, a choice tied more to sentiment than extravagance. Her fiancé, Nimesh, described her as gentle but firm about certain traditions. Often influenced by extended relatives, who wanted the ceremony to appear authentic for photos and community expectations. The Marwari mare assigned to her booking was usually reliable for procession work, trained to handle crowds, drum beats, and moderate fireworks. The harness system consisted of a padded breast collar, side straps, and reins threaded through simple rings, not specialized equipment, but serviceable for slow ceremonial movement. The carriage itself was light wood with ornamental panels and a shallow bench seat. Under normal conditions, the setup allowed for gradual speed changes and predictable handling. However, firecrackers could create sudden noise spikes that startled even seasoned horses, especially in enclosed spaces. During the procession, the handler had cautioned several times about the proximity of firecrackers. Relatives still chose to light more at the end, insisting it completed the celebration. The mare began tossing her head, pawing once and shifting weight unevenly, early indicators of rising agitation. No one paused the procession to let the mare settle. Then a cluster of firecrackers ignited closer to the horse than planned. The mare flinched hard, jerking forward and pulling the reins through the driver's hands. The baggy lurched down a narrow stone-lined alley that connected the street to the venue entrance. Guests shouted and tried to clear a path, but the space confined the mare's movement, increasing her panic. The driver attempted to regain control by bracing his feet, but the reins had slipped too far. As the mare accelerated, the left wheel struck a raised drainage lip, jolting the carriage sharply. Anaya, constrained by the weight and length of her dress, could barely brace or adjust her position. Witnesses later described the baggy's frame splintering as it scraped against the wall, and the tilt threw her sideways with considerable force. At the moment of impact, the horse was moving at roughly 13 miles per hour. She struck a plastered brick wall. The imprint on the wall later matched her shoulder and head. Several guests heard a muted crack at the moment of impact. She landed on the ground immediately after, veil tangled in broken wood. A nearby guest called emergency services immediately, and paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. But despite their efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Later autopsy determined the cause of death to be craniocervical dislocation, accompanied by compound skull fractures and multiple rib fractures causing rapid internal bleeding. Injuries indicated that death occurred within moments of impact. The alley surface, uneven with stone drainage edges, contributed to the carriage's tilting and subsequent loss of control. The limited ability to brace due to her dress further amplified the force transmitted to her body. Local schools held a brief remembrance in the following weeks. Nimesh remained by her side throughout, arranging funeral services and comforting relatives. The mare was retired from wedding duties, and the handler reinforced restrictions on fireworks for future processions. It was December 8, 2018, in São Paulo, Brazil. In an open event lot behind the community hall, workers moved between tables and cables, adjusting decorations as the wind shifted unpredictably. Mateus Rivo, 27, worked as an auto shop apprentice. He had a habit of taking on physical tasks without hesitation, partly to prove himself capable after months of struggling to move up at the shop. His fiancée, Sophia, was a preschool teacher from the same town. He often mentioned wanting to show his supervisors he could handle more responsibility, and helping with wedding setups had become a way of demonstrating his reliability to a wider group. Balloon arches with foil balloons attached to aluminum frames were lightweight, but electrically conductive. When lifted upright, the top section became a long horizontal bar, capable of bridging high-voltage lines if brought too close. The venue's overhead power lines carried 13.8 kilovolts, typical for urban distribution, with the lowest sagging wires at the minimum required clearance for safe handling of tall structures. The arch's base rested on plastic weights, but once lifted, the entire frame acted as a continuous conductor with no insulation. Under calm conditions, the risk remained low, but in shifting winds, the margin of safety dropped rapidly. That afternoon, the photographer requested an extra 2 feet of clearance for group shots. Mateus joined 3 other helpers to lift the arch. A crew member noted that the top seemed close to the lowest wire, but Mateus believed the cable hung high enough to avoid contact. Weather advisories had mentioned intermittent gusts, yet the team aimed to finish before guests arrived and continued repositioning despite the unstable wind. As they lifted the arch to full height, A sudden gust pushed the upper section sideways. The helpers stepped to adjust their footing, but the aluminum rod wobbled above them. Mateus tightened his grip, shifting his weight forward in an attempt to counterbalance. The next gust angled the top corner toward the energized wire faster than they could react. The aluminum frame contacted the live wire, producing an intense arc flash with a bright white flare. Mateus, holding the frame with both hands, received the direct current. His muscles locked instantly. Witnesses observed him fall backward as the arc ended when the arch dropped out of contact, smoke rising from his shirt, with scorch marks forming on the grass beneath him. Paramedics arrived within minutes after a family member called. Despite CPR and defibrillation, Mateus was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner determined the cause of death to be high-voltage electrocution, resulting in immediate cardiac arrest and respiratory failure. He also had third-degree burns on both palms, a linear exit burn on the left foot, and deep internal charring along the forearm muscles tracing the path of current. In the aftermath, Sophia stayed at the spot where Mateus fell, surrounded by family and friends. Weeks later, she held a private memorial there, placing candles and flowers as a personal tribute, while the municipal review of safety guidelines offered little comfort against her loss. It was May 4, 2016, on the second-floor terrace of a seaside hotel in Izmir, Turkey. The reception had just shifted into its quieter phase, with guests lingering after the ceremony. The air was calm, but the wooden railing closest to the waterline creaked intermittently under shifting weight. Kerem Ulis was a 31-year-old middle school science teacher. His bride, Selin, shared his quiet nature and had spent months planning the ceremony. Outside of work, Kerem lived quietly, enjoying small routines and simple comforts. Friends remembered him as gentle and dependable, the kind of person whose thoughtfulness often went unnoticed. In the months leading up to the wedding, Kerem had become more involved in documenting his life, partly due to gentle pressure from relatives, and partly because his students followed his occasional school-related updates online. His wedding sponsors included the local educational association, which provided small grants for teachers to highlight community engagement. Although he rarely sought attention, he understood the value of contributing to that visibility. The seaside hotel had a terrace known for its views, supported by metal brackets that had been installed over a decade earlier. The structure relied on equal distribution of weight across its surface, with an occupancy limit posted near the door. After the ceremony, the photographer suggested a group photo on the terrace. The sign listed a maximum of 12 people, a limit tied to the age and condition of the support brackets. Still, nearly 27 guests stepped onto the platform, following one another without hesitation. The estimated combined weight of the group roughly doubled the safe capacity of the terrace. No staff intervened, because the reception team was occupied inside preparing the next course. Kerem stood near the edge. Someone called for everyone to move closer, prompting a final shift that pushed weight toward the far corner. Witness accounts and later structural analysis aligned closely. One of the primary support brackets, compromised by years of salt exposure, sheared along its weld line. A phone recording captures the sharp metallic snap, followed by a rapid downward drop. The terrace gave way in a single motion, falling roughly 8 feet. The railings tore free as the platform collapsed, offering no meaningful resistance, and the board splintered under the load. Kerem was pushed outward as the railing split. His body rotated slightly during descent, with the upper torso tipping forward while the legs lagged, creating a diagonal landing trajectory. Footage shows his body striking the concrete courtyard below. Witnesses described a heavy, singular impact, immediate loss of movement, and no sign of protective reflex. 2 other guests fell behind him, but struck at different angles. Kerem absorbed the full force of the fall due to his placement at the outer edge. Selin screamed and tried to reach him, but she was pulled back by other guests. One of the nearby family members immediately called local emergency services. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes. They immediately assessed him and attempted basic life support while immobilizing him with a cervical collar. Observing he was unresponsive with fixed pupils. Despite these efforts on the terrace, Kerem was pronounced dead at the scene after confirming massive blunt force trauma and non-survivable injuries. The coroner documented massive blunt force trauma, including a crushed thorax, ruptured aorta, and multiple bilateral rib fractures. Loss of consciousness occurred instantly upon impact, and cardiac arrest followed within seconds. In the weeks that followed, Karem's students created a memorial display using his handwritten lab notes and the models he had built for class demonstrations. The hotel quietly replaced all balcony brackets and added bilingual warnings emphasizing strict occupancy limits. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.